What would you do if the first sign of something terribly wrong in your life arrived folded with a monthly mail? For Tobias Green, it began exactly like that, a routine envelope, a neat billing statement, a number that should have been familiar but suddenly wasn't. He had lived in that modest suburban street long enough to know the rhythm of his home, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of the furnace at night, the familiar blinking of the little charger light in the driveway when his electric SUV drank quietly overnight. Tobias liked systems. As a systems analyst, his days were spent finding patterns where everyone else saw noise. Numbers were not puzzles to him, they were arguments waiting to be understood. So when the bill arrived that month and the total made his heart hiccup, Tobias did what he always did. He looked for the pattern. The increase wasn't a slow climb. It was a spike, sudden and impossible to explain by the household's normal behavior. It read like a punctuation mark across a line of otherwise calm data. $200. That figure sat at the center of his kitchen table for a long while that evening, as he and his wife, Marlene, tried to puzzle out where the extra charge could have come from. Maybe the dryer, Marlene suggested. Or the kids left lights on all week. Their kids were older now. They left enough lights on to make a parent sigh, but not enough to justify the leap Tobias was seeing. He checked the usual suspects, the dishwasher cycles, the backup heater that ran once in a cold snap, even the kids' gaming console. Nothing added up. Something else nagged at Tobias: the hours. The numbers he was jotting down each night, a habit he'd developed out of pure professional curiosity, suggested the drain happened while the house slept. The watts clawing away from his meter weren't spent during family movie nights or cooking dinners. They were being pulled in the hushed hours after midnight. At first, he assumed a meter error. He called the utility company. He made them send a technician. They ran readings. They compared logs. They told him the numbers were correct. There was no utility company mistake they could find that left two possibilities: either the meter was right and some hidden appliance had started devouring electricity, or someone with access in the dead of night was taking it. Tobias did not want to believe the second option. In his mind, neighborhoods were knitted with a kind of soft trust. People didn't sneak into each other's driveways in the middle of the night to plug their cars into other people's outlets. People left cupcakes on porches at Thanksgiving. They borrowed lawn tools and returned them with a note. That was how it was supposed to work, but suspicion, once it comes into the house, is like a shadow that grows longer every hour. One evening, more for peace of mind than warfare, Tobias walked out to his driveway sometime after midnight. The street was all but a line of dark rectangles, houses sleeping like closed books. The only light came from a distant lamppost, a porch light across the way, and the soft, almost imperceptible glow at the base of his EV charger. He rubbed the cable between his fingers. It should have been cool. Instead, the plastic had a faint warmth to it, not a sign of recent heavy charging, but of being in use at some point not long before. He checked the plug. It was disconnected. His car had been unplugged all night. Yet the evidence in the warmth of the cable suggested otherwise. Tobias felt the familiar hum of calculation rise, start collecting data, get proof, minimize hearsay. He could imagine the conversation ahead if this was indeed a person taking advantage of him, how messy it could get. He imagined having to face them, and he imagined the neighborhood's polite faces turning into a chorus of opinions that did not always favor the truth. The next morning, instead of mentioning it over coffee, Tobias drove to the hardware store. He bought a motion-activated security camera and a cheap enough tripod to point directly at the charging port. It wasn't high-end. It did not have a cinematic flair, but it had timestamps and motion detection. To Tobias, that would be enough. He installed it that night, the camera's lens like a little eye watching his driveway. He placed it where it could catch the movement of anyone who would try to steal power. Then he sat awake in bed, pretending to sleep, listening for nothing and everything at once. When the footage appeared on his screen the next morning, he was not ready for how mundane the violence of it would look. There was no cloak and dagger shadowy figure, no hurried escape. The footage showed a woman crossing his lawn in the deep quiet of night with the same steady, unhurried gait a person might use to get the mail. She wore a cardigan wrapped neatly around her shoulders. She moved as if she belonged there. She crouched, reached for the charger, and plugged a cable in with practiced ease. It was the most ordinary theft he had ever seen. Tobias froze. He scrubbed the footage backward, forward, again. He magnified the grainy pixels until her face resolved into something he recognized with a cold, sinking clarity. She was not unknown. She was not a stranger who happened upon their street. She was their treasurer, the one who ran the HOA notices and handed out fines like punctuation marks for anyone who dared to deviate from the aesthetic standards she enforced. Her name, Priscilla Hensley. Priscilla had always been something of an iron law in the neighborhood. She attended every meeting in a blazer, used phrases like community standards and property values the way others used weather small talk. She wrote polite but pointed notes about people's hedges. She complained about holiday lights that violated whatever chart she kept in her head. People joked about her with a nervous laugh at barbecues. She was the person who kept the wheels of order turning, at least, that was the story she told the block. Now there she was, from his camera's cold, digital vantage, not glancing over her shoulder, not hushed, simply plugging her car into his charger and walking back across the street the same way a neighbor might take a borrowed cup of sugar. What do you do when the person who policing your community is the one breaking your boundary? What happens when the person with the gavel at meetings also thinks themselves entitled to the use of your property? Tobias felt a cocktail of emotion, anger, disbelief, the hot flush of being personally violated. But underneath all of it was a steadier, clinical resolve. Evidence matters. So he printed the frames. He labeled them. He put them into a folder and walked across the street. The first confrontation was not cinematic. He knocked on her door with the printed photos in his hand, voice steady but not loud. "Priscilla," he said when she opened, "I need to talk." She looked him over, surprised for a moment, then composed into that familiar expression he had seen at every HOA meeting, cool, measured, a little superior. "Tobias," she said, "what brings you by this late?" He slid the folder toward her and let the silence do some of the work. The photos were stark, an adult woman kneeling beside an outlet, time-stamped, undeniable. She flipped through them. Her face moved like a small tide, a flicker of surprise, then back to that controlled mask. "This is dramatic," she said finally, closing the folder with a small, deliberate movement. "We are a community. We share resources. Your charger sits there unused part of the time. I thought you'd understand." His mouth tightened at the casual wrongness of it. "Sharing doesn't mean stealing," he replied. "You can't come onto my property and plug your car into my outlet in the middle of the night." She smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Careful with the words you choose, Tobias," she said. "You know this community runs because we enforce standards. Maybe your setup isn't fully approved. Maybe your charger isn't compliant." It was a pivot disguised as concern, an attempt to weaponize the administrative rules she oversaw. It was a pivot disguised as concern, an attempt to weaponize the administrative rules she oversaw. Tobias felt the old fear surface, that perhaps taking this to the HOA would mean nothing because she had allies, because she knew the bylaws backwards and had a network of polite knights willing to follow her lead. He left then, bristling. She had not denied it. She had not offered even a small apology. She had turned it into a question about his compliance and implied consequences. If the conversation had been between two strangers, he could have chalked it up to a misunderstanding. Between neighbors, and with her position, it read like leverage. He could have gone to the police then. He could have filed a report. But the police, he thought, might see only a late-night plug and call it less than a crime. The HOA, he feared, would be a different animal, which is why he resolved to gather more proof. He kept the camera running, night after night, like a watchful sentinel at the edge of his property, and she kept coming. Sometimes she arrived just before midnight. Other times, at 2 in the morning, wrapped in that same cardigan as if it were a uniform. Her movements never betrayed a hint of stealth. She approached the charger, plugged in without hurry, then walked back across the street as though the habit belonged to her. It was not only the theft now, it felt like a test. She wanted him to react. Maybe she wanted him to be the troublemaker. She wanted the story that would justify her retaliation. He started keeping a nightly ledger where he recorded times, temperatures, anything that might matter. He charted the drain and documented the difference in his household's normal draw versus the nights his charger had been used by someone else. He printed the frames and hand-delivered copies to a few neighbors quietly, people he trusted enough to be plain about what he had found. Some were stunned. Others were cautious. Priscilla had supporters, often those who loved the order she imposed or feared being the next target. The neighborhood, Tobias realized, was not a homogeneous chorus. It was a collection of small interests that often aligned with whoever held the loudest megaphone of authority. Tobias hadn't planned to go public so soon. He had hoped more footage, more undeniable evidence, would corner Priscilla without giving her space to twist the narrative. But sometimes life doesn't wait for careful plans. It happened on a warm evening, not long after the first confrontation. Tobias returned from work, tired but alert, and noticed Priscilla standing near the curb with two neighbors, Roger Kim, his immediate next-door neighbor, and Donna Myers from the corner house. They were laughing lightly, papers in hand, perhaps flyers or HOA notices. As Tobias pulled into his driveway, he caught the subtle shift, Roger glancing awkwardly, Donna raising her brows, and Priscilla smiling with that polished superiority. He knew, instantly, she was already spinning her side of the story. He stepped out of the SUV, folder of photos still tucked inside, and walked directly toward them. His heartbeat drummed, but his voice came out steady. "Priscilla, we need to talk." Her smile tightened, but she didn't look rattled. Instead, she raised her voice slightly, making sure both neighbors could hear. "Oh, Tobias. Perfect timing. We were just discussing HOA guidelines for outdoor fixtures. Did you know there's concern about safety hazards with certain setups?" Tobias clenched his fists. He recognized the game, cut the act. "You've been stealing my electricity for weeks. I have you on camera, night after night, plugging your car into my outlet. Don't stand here pretending it's about safety." Roger shifted uncomfortably. Donna's eyes widened. But Priscilla didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, her tone dripping with mock concern. "That's a harsh word, Tobias. I told you before, this is a community. Sharing resources is part of being a good neighbor. Maybe, instead of throwing accusations, you should consider how selfish you sound." Tobias snapped, his patience burning away. "Selfish? My family's paying for your Tesla to run. You've cost me hundreds of dollars, and you're calling me selfish." Donna stepped in gently, raising her hands. "Maybe there's a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." Tobias cut her off, his voice cracking through the evening air. He turned directly to Roger. "I have video proof. She knows exactly what she's doing." Roger rubbed the back of his neck, glancing between them. "That doesn't sound right, Priscilla." "If he has proof," but before he could finish, Priscilla shot him a sharp glare that silenced him instantly. Then she leaned closer to Tobias, her voice low enough only he could hear. "You really want to go to war with me? Think carefully. I know every bylaw, every technicality. That charger of yours? It's a makeshift setup. One complaint, and I'll bury you in violations. Your wife will hate it. Your kids will feel the tension. Is that what you want?" Tobias's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to drag her into the street and play the footage for everyone. But he saw the calculation in her eyes. She thrived on this. Conflict was her playground. "Finally," he hissed back, "do what you want. But if you touch my outlet again, I'll take this to the police." Every clip, every frame. Her expression flickered for a second, but then she plastered on a wide smile and raised her voice again for the neighbors to hear. "Well, isn't this dramatic? Tobias here thinks I'm sneaking into his property at night. Let's hope he doesn't waste everyone's time with silly accusations." With that, she turned and walked back across the street, leaving Roger and Donna awkwardly frozen in the dusk. Tobias exhaled, his hands trembling with rage. Roger offered a sympathetic shrug. "She's tough to deal with. But if you've really got proof, maybe you should file a report. People are tired of her antics." Donna nodded quietly. "She's been like this for years. Always threatening fines, always acting superior. If you're the one finally standing up to her, don't back down." Tobias thanked them, but the words felt hollow. He knew what awaited him inside, the weight of uncertainty. Later that night, Marlene found him staring at the latest electric bill. She touched his shoulder gently. "You can't let her drag you into an endless fight. Be smart, Tobias." But he couldn't shake the thought she thinks she's untouchable. Because she's the treasurer. Because she knows the system. But if I don't stop her, she'll keep walking all over us. Marlene's voice softened, but her warning was firm. "Then don't let her." But be careful. People like her don't stop until they're forced to. Tobias nodded, staring at the glowing footage on his laptop. Priscilla, calm and deliberate, crossing his driveway as if she owned it. He knew one thing for certain. The next move would not be hers alone. This wasn't just about electricity anymore. It was about dignity, about not being bullied in his own home, and the neighborhood was about to see a fight they would never forget. The next strike didn't come in the dead of night, or in a whispered threat across the driveway. It came in daylight, neat and official, tucked beneath Tobias's doormat. When he bent down and unfolded the paper, his chest tightened. It was an HOA violation notice, formal letterhead, stamped, signed by none other than Priscilla Hensley, Treasurer. Your electric vehicle charger does not comply with HOA exterior fixture regulations. Remove or relocate within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in fines and further action. Marlene read over his shoulder, her face turning pale with anger. She's doing this on purpose, she whispered. She couldn't scare you with words, so now she's hiding behind paperwork. Tobias folded the notice carefully, as if it might bite him. The irony was bitter. The very woman siphoning electricity from his outlet was now accusing him of breaking rules with it. That night, over dinner, the kids noticed the tension. "Dad, why are you mad at Ms. Hensley?" his daughter asked. Marlene quickly diverted the conversation, but Tobias couldn't help wondering how long before the children became pawns in this war. He spent hours at his desk, comparing the HOA bylaws with his charger's installation manual. The outlet was up to code. The charger was a certified model. If anything, it was more compliant than most. Still, Priscilla's notice had the official tone of authority, and he knew some neighbors would believe it without question. The next weekend, he installed a second camera, hidden higher, angled directly at the sidewalk. If she was going to build a case, so was he, and sure enough, the footage rolled in. Priscilla came again, like clockwork. Midnight, 2 a.m., always with that same calm stroll, cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, face set in stone. But this time, something went differently. As she plugged in her car, the charger made a faint click and a small spark leapt from the connector. She flinched, jerked the plug free, and muttered something sharp under her breath. Then she glanced up and down the street, the first time she'd ever looked nervous. Tobias watched from his laptop in real time, Marlene peering over his shoulder. He whispered, "Got you." The next morning, he compiled everything: timestamps, electricity usage charts, still frames from both cameras. He even clipped the spark moment, a perfect shot of her startled face, but he didn't go to the police. Not yet. He knew what would hit harder: the neighbors. That evening, he slipped copies of the images into plain envelopes and delivered them quietly to a handful of trusted homes: Roger, Donna, the Martins at the end of the street. People who had long felt the sting of Priscilla's notices and fines. By Sunday, the whispers began. At first just a question: did you hear about Priscilla? Is it true she's been stealing power? The block was alive with gossip, the way small communities always are. And for the first time, Tobias didn't feel like the one under suspicion. But Priscilla was no fool. She sensed the shift, and instead of retreating, she escalated. 3 days later, Tobias opened his mailbox to find another notice, this one louder, nastier, dripping with authority. Due to repeated non-compliance, fines will begin immediately. Failure to remove unauthorized charger will result in suspension of community privileges. Marlene slammed it on the table. She's cornering us. Tobias, we have to fight back before she ruins us. Tobias nodded grimly. This isn't about a charger anymore. It's about control. She's trying to crush me before anyone else dares to stand up to her. He looked across the street at her perfectly trimmed lawn, the polished car in her driveway, the blinds drawn tight, and in that moment, he made a decision. The next battle would not be quiet or private. The whole neighborhood was about to see who Priscilla really was. The announcement came on a yellow flyer slipped under every front door. Special HOA meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Topic: community standards and safety violations. Tobias didn't need to guess who had written it. The language was pure Priscilla, vague enough to sound professional, sharp enough to put him on edge. When Thursday arrived, the community center buzzed with more people than usual. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, neighbors clustered in small groups, whispering. Some glanced at Tobias with sympathy, others with suspicion. And at the front, perfectly poised behind the lectern, stood Priscilla in her blazer, papers stacked neatly before her. She began with her usual smooth authority. "Thank you all for coming. As treasurer, it's my responsibility to ensure our neighborhood remains safe, compliant, and attractive to future buyers. Unfortunately, recent violations have forced us to address some concerns tonight." Her eyes flicked toward Tobias for just a fraction of a second, and the room seemed to understand who she meant. Tobias sat still, folder of evidence on his lap. His pulse hammered. He had debated whether to speak at all, but as Priscilla's words dripped poison across the room, he knew staying silent would be surrender. She continued, "Certain residents have installed unapproved electrical equipment that poses risks, fire hazards, unsightly fixtures, and potential liability for us all. We must decide whether such equipment should be removed immediately." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few nodded in agreement. Others frowned, unconvinced that was Tobias's moment. He stood, every eye swiveling toward him. His voice shook at first but grew steadier with each word. "My charger is not a hazard. It's fully compliant, certified, and safe, and I can prove it. But what I can also prove is this." He opened the folder and held up a still frame from his camera. Priscilla, crouched in the dead of night, plugging her car into his outlet. Gasps filled the room. He passed copies down the rows, each neighbor staring, whispering louder. Priscilla's mask cracked for the briefest second, then she laughed. "Too high, too sharp, this is absurd. I was checking for safety, making sure his equipment wasn't dangerous." Tobias's voice rose. "Safety? At 2 in the morning? Plugging in your car isn't checking for safety, it's stealing." The room erupted. Some neighbors demanded answers, others exchanged knowing looks as if long-held suspicions were finally confirmed. Donna from the corner house spoke up. "She fined me for having my wreath up 2 days past Christmas. And now she's caught stealing? Enough is enough." Roger added, "We can't let the treasurer abuse her power. This isn't leadership. This is hypocrisy." Priscilla tried to regain control, slamming her papers on the lectern. "You're all being manipulated. He's twisting the narrative." But her voice was drowned out by the growing tide of dissent. For the first time in years, the room wasn't nodding with her. They were standing against her. Tobias felt a surge of relief, not victory yet, but a shift. The wall of fear around Priscilla was cracking, and everyone could see the cracks. This was no longer just his fight. The neighborhood itself was waking up. After the meeting, the neighborhood was buzzing. Small knots of people stood under porch lights, whispering, shaking their heads. For years, Priscilla had been untouchable, the voice of rules and fines. But now, her authority looked brittle. Roger stopped by Tobias's driveway that night. "You know," he said quietly, "people are talking. Some are finally admitting what she's done to them. Donna's still mad about that wreath fine. The Martin said she once threatened to report their dog for barking when it wasn't even theirs. She's made too many enemies." Tobias listened, arms folded, but his relief was tempered by caution. "She's not done. She won't give up just because people are whispering. She'll find another angle." And Tobias was right. The very next morning, every mailbox in the neighborhood carried a folded newsletter, bold title across the top, "Community Safety Alert." Inside, Priscilla's words painted Tobias as reckless. "Unauthorized equipment has been identified as a fire hazard. Until removed, residents are urged to report any concerns. Our priority is the safety of all families." No names were printed, but everyone knew who she meant. Neighbors eyed Tobias's house as they walked their dogs. Some waved, others looked away, and Marlene slammed the paper on the table. "She's turning the whole neighborhood against us. If people believe this, we'll be isolated." But Tobias was ready. That evening, he printed larger stills from his camera, clearer images, undeniable proof. He taped one to his garage door where every passerby could see Priscilla, in the act, plugging in her car.by. The next morning, the street was alive again, but this time with murmurs of disbelief and laughter at Priscilla's expense. Children whispered, pointing across at her house. Adults smirked as she hurried to her car for the first time. She looked shaken that night. Tobias sat with Marlene on the porch. "She wanted a war," he said, voice low. "Now she has won. But I won't let her win by lying. The truth is stronger." Marlene squeezed his hand. "Then be ready." People like her don't go down quietly. Across the street, Priscilla's blind snapped shut, but Tobias had the sense she was still watching, planning her next move in the dark, and deep down, he knew the battle had only just begun. For a few days, the street felt like a stage divided down the middle. On one side stood Tobias, quietly determined, evidence on his side. On the other, Priscilla, still clinging to her role as treasurer, trying to mask her guilt with authority. Her neighbors avoided choosing sides openly, but their glances gave them away. Some nodded at Tobias as he watered his lawn. Others crossed the street rather than walk past him, fearful of getting caught in the conflict. Then came the next blow. On Tuesday morning, Tobias found an envelope taped to his front door. This wasn't a violation notice. It was worse, a summons to appear before the HOA board for a formal hearing. The letter accused him of defamation, harassment, and distribution of misleading materials that disrupt community harmony. Marlene read it twice, her hand shaking. She's turning the whole board against you. If they believe this, they could fine us thousands, maybe even move to suspend our membership. Tobias set the letter down slowly. His anger was steady now, not fiery, but cold, deliberate. Then it's time to show them everything. Not just photos, the full videos, the meter readings, the logs. If she wants a trial, she'll get one. That night, he prepared his case like a lawyer. Every frame from the cameras, every electricity bill highlighted and charted, even a timeline of Priscilla's visits compared against the usage spikes. He worked until midnight, Marlene helping him organize the files into neat binders. At one point, she touched his arm. Promise me something. Whatever happens, don't let her drag you down to her level. Win, but don't lose yourself. He nodded, though his jaw stayed tight. I just want the truth out. That's all. Across the street, Priscilla's blinds glowed faintly as if she, too, was preparing. Tobias could almost imagine her rehearsing her lines, sharpening her smile into a weapon. The hearing was set for Friday night. The community center would be full again, not for routine business, but for a showdown, and Tobias knew this was no longer just about electricity or bills or even one woman's abuse of power. It was about whether truth could survive in a place ruled by fear. Friday evening arrived heavy with tension. The community center, usually a place for bake sales and quiet budget discussions, now felt like a courtroom. Rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, their conversations hushed but urgent. Children sat wide-eyed, sensing the drama even if they didn't understand it. At the front, the HOA board sat behind a long table, 3 members who had often nodded along to Priscilla's suggestions in the past. And beside them, sitting straighter than ever, was Priscilla herself, blazer crisp, hair perfectly set, her stack of papers like weapons ready for battles. Tobias entered with Marlene at his side. He carried a binder under his arm, another tucked against his chest, his face pale but determined. For days he had rehearsed his words, but now, with dozens of eyes watching, his throat felt tight. The chairperson, Mr. Keller, cleared his throat. This hearing is to address complaints filed regarding property violations and community disruption. Both parties will have the chance to present evidence. Let's begin. Priscilla rose first. Her voice was calm, confident, almost soothing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Neighbors, board members, I take no pleasure in being here tonight. My role has always been to protect this community, to ensure safety and harmony. But sadly, certain individuals have chosen to spread false information, to stir up conflict, and to defame not only me but the association itself. Murmurs rippled through the audience. She continued, sliding a glossy handout across the table. Here are the guidelines on exterior electrical fixtures. Unauthorized installations pose risks, fire hazards, insurance issues, liability for us all. Mr. Tobias Green's charger falls into this category. And when I attempted to raise these concerns, instead of cooperating, he launched a campaign of slander, distributing misleading photos to damage my reputation. She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd with calculated sadness. I asked the board to enforce our standards. Not for me, but for the safety of every family here. Applause broke from a small cluster of her supporters. Tobias felt his stomach twist, but Marlene squeezed his hand. It was his turn. He stood slowly, placing his binders on the table. His voice trembled at first, but anger and truth steadied him. I never wanted a war. I only wanted to know why my bills had suddenly spiked. As a systems analyst, I tracked data, and the data told me something was draining power from my home at night. I investigated. I installed cameras, and this is what I found. He opened the binder, pulling out still frames and laying them across the table one by one. Gasps filled the room as Priscilla's face appeared, crouched at his charger, timestamped at 2:07 a.m. Another photo, 1:43 a.m. Another, 12:58 a.m. Dozens of them, spread like a deck of damning cards. This isn't slander. This is evidence. He turned his laptop toward the crowd, pressing play. The video rolled, Priscilla walking across the street, calm and unhurried, plugging in her car as if it were the most natural act in the world. The room was silent except for the faint click of the charger. Then another clip, the spark, her startled expression, her muttered curse before yanking the cord free. Whispers rose, louder and louder, until even the board members leaned forward, frowning. Priscilla shot to her feet, face red. This is taken out of context. I was checking for a hazard, just as I said before. Tobias's voice cut across hers, sharp now. Checking for a hazard doesn't explain weeks of footage. It doesn't explain the usage logs, the bills, the pattern that matches exactly with your visits. He flipped open the second binder, charts, highlighted bills, neat columns of data. Every spike in electricity usage aligns with the timestamps of these videos. This isn't one mistake. It's a pattern. It's theft. The room erupted. Some neighbors shouted in agreement. Others whispered in disbelief. Donna stood up, pointing a finger toward Priscilla. You fined me $100 for painting my shutters the wrong shade of blue. And now we find out this is what you've been doing? Enough, Roger added, his voice shaking but firm. We trusted you, Priscilla. You were supposed to protect this community. Instead, you abused it. The board tried to call for order, but the tide had turned. For the first time, Priscilla's composure cracked. Her hands trembled as she gathered her papers, her voice rising in desperation. He's manipulating you. Don't let him destroy everything we've built. But the words rang hollow. The crowd was no longer nodding. They were glaring. Tobias closed his binder and sat, his chest heaving. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight begin to lift. Not victory yet, but the truth was out, undeniable, inescapable. The chairperson cleared his throat again, his voice subdued. The board will review this evidence carefully. Until then, all pending fines and notices against Mr. Green are suspended. Marlene squeezed Tobias's hand again, her eyes wet with relief. He exhaled deeply, watching Priscilla sink back into her chair, pale and cornered. The war wasn't over. But the balance of power had shifted, and everyone in that room knew it. The night of the hearing ended with a storm of whispers. Neighbors filed out of the community center in small groups, voices sharp and buzzing like bees. For years, Priscilla had commanded silence. People bowed their heads, paid their fines, swallowed their frustration. But now, they were talking, loudly, openly, and her name was no longer spoken with respect. Tobias walked home with Marlene beside him. Their children had stayed with Donna during the meeting, and when they returned, his daughter asked, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" He knelt down, hugging her tightly. "No, sweetheart, not anymore. We just told the truth tonight. And the truth is stronger than lies." But even as he said it, Tobias knew the war wasn't finished. People like Priscilla didn't crumble in one blow. They fought, clawed, twisted every angle until the very end. The next morning, the neighborhood was split. Some residents came to Tobias, patting his shoulder, thanking him for having the courage to stand up. Roger brought over a box of muffins his wife had baked. Donna hugged Marlene on the front porch, whispering, finally, someone had the guts to call her out. But others were hesitant. Mr. Jenkins down the street muttered, "HOA rules are HOA rules. Maybe you should have just taken the charger down and avoided the drama." Another family crossed the road instead of greeting Tobias when he watered the lawn, and across the street, Priscilla's blinds stayed closed. Her car didn't move for 2 days. But Tobias knew she wasn't defeated, only regrouping. By midweek, proof arrived. A thick envelope landed in Tobias's mailbox. Inside were typed pages, a formal letter from Priscilla's attorney. The words were cold and sharp: cease and desist from distributing defamatory materials. Remove all images and recordings of Ms. Hensley from public display. Failure to comply will result in civil action for damages. Marlene's face went pale as she read it. She's threatening to sue us, Tobias. This could get expensive. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter, the weight of exhaustion pressing on him. She's bluffing. If this went to court, the evidence would destroy her. But she's hoping fear will silence us. Marlene reached across the table, squeezing his hand. We can't let her scare us. If we back down now, it's over. She wins. Tobias nodded slowly, a fire returning to his chest. Then we won't back down. If she wants a fight in court, she'll have to explain those videos under oath. That weekend, something unexpected happened. A group of neighbors knocked on Tobias's door. Donna, Roger, the Martins, even a few others who had stayed quiet before. We're tired of her, Donna said firmly. She's ruled this neighborhood for too long. You stood up first, but you won't stand alone. We're ready to take action. Tobias blinked in surprise. Action? Roger stepped forward. A petition. We'll gather signatures, call for a vote. If the majority agrees, we can remove her from the HOA board. She can't bully people if she's not in charge anymore. For the first time, Tobias felt the tide turning not just toward survival, but toward victory. Marlene smiled through tears. You mean we could actually end this? Donna nodded yes. But we'll need every bit of evidence, every story. No more whispers. This time, the whole neighborhood has to speak. Tobias glanced at the binders stacked on his desk, at the cameras still watching his driveway, at the neighbors' determined faces, and for the first time in weeks, he believed it. Priscilla's reign was breaking, but he also knew one thing: cornered animals fought hardest, and Priscilla Hensley was about to be cornered. The following week transformed the neighborhood into something Tobias had never seen before. Usually, the streets were quiet, trimmed lawns, polite nods, the sound of sprinklers in the morning. But now, there was an undercurrent of energy. Neighbors gathered in clusters, not to gossip idly, but to organize. Roger and Donna came first, clipboards in hand. We've drafted a petition, Roger explained, eyes burning with determination. If we get the majority to sign, we can call a special election and remove Priscilla from the board. Tobias took the clipboard, scanning the paper. At the top, bold words read, "For the good of our community." Dozens of names already filled the lines. He felt his throat tighten. People weren't just whispering anymore. They were standing for days. The effort spread. Neighbors knocked on doors, telling their own stories, the fines, the threats, the petty punishments Priscilla had imposed. A woman recalled being written up for her garden gnome. Another man confessed she once threatened to have his fence torn down for being 2 inches too high. Every story added fuel to the fire, and through it all, Tobias shared his evidence. He invited small groups into his living room, playing the footage on his laptop. Each time, the gasps were the same, followed by shaking heads, followed by signatures on the petition. But Priscilla wasn't idle. Flyers appeared overnight on telephone poles and doorsteps. Protect our neighborhood. Stop the lies. The text accused Tobias of fabricating videos, of endangering community unity, of being a man with a personal vendetta against those who uphold standards. Marlene tore one flyer down and shoved it into the trash. She's desperate now. She knows she's losing. But Tobias stayed cautious. Desperation made people dangerous. One evening, as Tobias returned from work, he found Priscilla waiting on his driveway. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were sharp, her arms folded tightly. You think you're clever, she hissed, stepping closer. But you don't understand what you've started. This petition will tear the neighborhood apart. People will regret following you. Tobias held his ground, though his pulse pounded in his ears. No, Priscilla, they are not following me. They're just done following you. Her face hardened. You'll regret this. Then she turned sharply and stalked back across the street. Marlene, who had been watching from the porch, rushed down. She threatened you again. She's cornered, Tobias said quietly. And cornered people lash out. We have to be ready. By Friday, the petition was complete. More than 2/3 of the neighborhood had signed. Roger dropped the thick stack of pages on Tobias's table, his grin wide. This is it. With these signatures, we can demand a vote. The board can't ignore us anymore." Donna added, her voice firm. "We'll call the special election next week. By this time tomorrow, she won't be treasurer." For the first time in weeks, Tobias allowed himself a smile. He hugged Marlene, who whispered, "Maybe this nightmare is almost over." But as he looked out the window, across the street at Priscilla's darkened house, he couldn't shake the feeling that she had one last move to play. The battle wasn't finished yet. The night of the special election felt different from every HOA meeting before. The community center was full, every chair taken, neighbors standing along the walls, murmuring with anticipation. The petition had shaken the neighborhood awake, and tonight, the vote would decide everything. Priscilla arrived last. She walked in with her head high, blazer sharp, a folder clutched tightly under her arm. But Tobias noticed the flicker in her eyes, not confidence, but strain. The room no longer belonged to her. The chairperson, Mr. Keller, called the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda is simple. Based on the submitted petition, the community will vote on whether to remove Treasurer Priscilla Hensley from the HOA board. Both parties may make final statements before the vote. Priscilla rose first. Her voice was steady, but the edge of desperation lingered beneath the Polish neighbors. "I know emotions are high, but let me remind you, everything I've ever done has been for this community. I've upheld standards, enforced rules, protected property values. Without order, neighborhoods fall apart. Don't let one man's obsession and manipulated videos undo years of progress." Some clapped, but it was scattered, weak. Then Tobias stood. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his binder one last time and placed 3 photos on the table. "This isn't obsession. This is fact. Night after night, Priscilla used my charger, without permission, without apology. The data, the footage, the bills, they all match. And when confronted, she didn't stop. Instead, she tried to silence me with fines, notices, and threats. That isn't leadership. That's abuse of power." He looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes. "This isn't just about me. Every one of you has a story, a letter, a fine, a humiliation. Tonight, you get to decide if that continues, or if we take our neighborhood back." The room was silent for a beat, then a wave of murmurs spread, agreement, nods, even quiet applause. Mr. Keller cleared his throat. "We will proceed with the vote. All in favor of removing Treasurer Priscilla Hensley, raise your hands." Hands shot up across the room. Rogers, Donners, the Martins, dozens more. The wave of arms left little doubt. Only a small handful stayed down. Mr. Keller didn't even need to count twice. His voice was firm. "The majority has spoken. Effective immediately, Priscilla Hensley is removed from the HOA board." A collective exhale filled the room, followed by scattered cheers. Marlene squeezed Tobias's hand, tears shining in her eyes. Roger clapped him on the back, grinning. Donna hugged him tightly. Priscilla, pale and rigid, gathered her papers in silence. For a moment, she seemed about to protest, but the wall of faces staring back at her stopped the words in her throat. With a sharp turn, she walked out, the door slamming behind her. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. Neighbors lingered outside, laughing, sharing stories they had once been too afraid to tell. For the first time in years, the street felt like a community again. On his porch, Tobias sat with Marlene, the glow of his charger blinking softly in the driveway. "It's over," she whispered. Tobias shook his head, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "Not over. But maybe finally beginning." She leaned against him, and together they watched the quiet street. Across the road, Priscilla's house sat dark, blinds shut tight. For once, there was no fear, only relief. For Tobias knew the scars of the battle would linger. But he also knew the truth had won, and that was enough. The neighborhood was theirs again, and the silence of the night, once broken by stolen power, now belonged to them all.